tonight we're talking about why children don't mind. And really, there's three specific reasons why the traditional approach to getting our children to, we call it obey or do what we say. There's three specific reasons why the traditional approach to parenting doesn't work. And specifically in the church, there are two very significant spiritual reasons why the traditional approach to Christian parenting doesn't work. You know, the one where we tell them what to do, and if they don't do it, we punish them, hoping that over time they'll learn the behavior that we desire and that we want them to have. And so there's a statistic in the church that really drives me. And this statistic shows, and it's been steady for many years, that 2 out of 3 children raised in Christian homes leave the church as young adults. And after I learned what I did about what the Bible says about training children, what it really says, I immediately made the correlation and understood that it's not the church that's driving the children away. It's what's happening in the home and how we're raising them. Now, the way we're raising them, we learned it in church, but it isn't the church that can fix the problem. It's the way parents are raising their children, Christian parents specifically, because we're more adamant about this obedience. Do what I say. I'm the authority. That authoritarian approach to parenting that's very behavior focused, and so more so than non-Christians. And so we're actually working harder at the failing system than the typical parent, just the everyday ordinary out there in the world parent. So so the subtitle to this workshop, which was Why Your Children Don't Mind, is the discovery that rocked my world. And this is the foundation for everything I teach in my parenting workshops. And we're going to get into that in a minute. But first, let's talk about the 3 reasons your kids don't mind. So the first reason that children don't respond to what their parents are saying, and when I say children, I'm mainly talking about 8 years and under, because though we'll see in a minute, those years are very strategic and formative. But even up to 13 years old, most of this applies. After 13, the brain is in a different state, and we're going to talk about that. But the first reason that children don't respond to what we tell them to do is because we're not speaking their language. Children are not miniature adults. Their brain has not fully developed. They don't have the reasoning capacity as an adult. And so we're talking to them in a way that they can't even compute. So I learned this at a very young age. I became a parent at 19 years old. I was fresh out of my own childhood, barely. And so I didn't know anything about parenting. I just knew that I wanted to raise my daughter in an environment where she felt safe, loved, and important. And those were things I didn't feel in my own childhood. And so intuitively, or maybe because of experience, I just wanted to give her what I didn't get. Well, everything went fine for about 18 months. And then she got to that age where she started running my life, and I didn't know what to do. And I didn't want to revert to being controlling and overbearing. I wanted to be able to engage her peacefully. And I felt like there must be a way. And so, you know, they say when the student is ready, the teacher appears. And that was true for me. So I stumbled across an ad for a parenting class, and I thought, you can learn how to be a parent. You know, this was long before the internet. My oldest daughter is over 40. She's 43 and a half. And so I was, you know, I see a print ad in the newspaper, you know, in the old dinosaur days. So I signed up for this class, and I came home the very first day with tools that got me different results, the results I wanted. And that was when I realized 2 things: that it wasn't my daughter that needed training as much as it was me. And I needed to learn to speak her language. I needed to learn to interact with her in a way that she could respond to. The second thing I learned was that I was creating the results I was getting, which kind of goes hand in hand with the first thing that I learned. But that if I change my input, I would get different results. And so it's kind of like, you know, you could sit in a car all day pushing the brake, expecting it to go, and it's not going to go. But as soon as you push the gas, it goes. So I just needed the right tool. But the problem is most parents keep doing the same thing over and over and over and over again, thinking that it'll bring different results. And well, we call that insanity, when you do the same thing over and over expecting different results. And so what we need to learn to do is pick up the right tool. You know, every job requires the right tools, and it's the same with parenting. And so the first thing we want to talk about is that we need to learn to speak their language. So let's look at just some very basic cognitive development. So from 0 to 3 years old, a child is in a brainwave state that is completely receptive. And when they measure their brainwaves, all they have is delta brainwaves for the first 3 years. And what that is the same brainwaves that adults have in a deep sleep. So one psychiatrist put it this way. He said, it's as if they're asleep with their eyes open. And that's why you don't have any conscious memory before age 3, because you're not really awake yet. So they're in this dreamlike state. And so what happens is everything comes in without being filtered. Everything just coming in, all their experiences, all their sensory experience and information is just coming in. It's being filed away, and it literally creates the foundation for their entire life. And the psychologists say that our entire worldview is shaped in those first 3 years. And that's how we view ourselves, how we view the world, and how we even relate to God is formed in those first 3 years. And when you think about that, that's pretty profound. But it's a window of opportunity as well. So in this first 3 years, they're completely receptive. They have no ability to filter if they want to. They're not even consciously aware of what's going on. In fact, it's kind of ironic that our self-image and our worldview is shaped by other people in those early years. So everything's received as fact. They have no ability to judge, evaluate, make choices or decisions about whether or not they're going to believe something or receive something. It just all goes in. They have no ability, obviously, to understand abstract concepts like honesty or obedience or sharing and those kind of things that we try to teach them in those early years. And it isn't that we can't teach them in those early years. It's just that we've been approaching it the wrong way. So they're completely impulsive in this stage. They don't have the ability to decide whether they're going to react or respond to a stimulus. They just do. And they're driven by desire. They see something they want, they grab it or they take it. And they don't have the ability to delay responses or gratification. So they're totally reactive to their environment. The other thing about kids in the age of 0 to 3 is their needs and desires are the same to them. They can't differentiate between a need or a desire. So they will, what's a good example? A 2-year-old sees a toy he wants, and if he wants it and desires it, that's a need to him. It's the same thing. He can't reason and say, oh, I don't really need that toy, I just want it. So needs and desires are the same to these little ones. They have no concept of authority. They don't understand that you're the boss or you're in charge or that you have responsibility for them. All those abstract ideas, they don't have any concept of that. They're very robotic in their responses and automated. They just respond. Their wants override consequences. They don't even understand consequences. If they want something, they just believe they can have it. They live in the now. They have no concept of time. Tomorrow doesn't exist. So to tell a 2-year-old, you can have that later, they just cry louder, because to them, that's saying you can't have it, right? They can't see the big picture. They live completely in what they can see, taste, touch, feel right now. So that's why, they get to that age where if they can't see mom, she doesn't exist, so they cry. And also during this stage, no, they learn to say no, because what's happening is they're learning that they're a separate being. Up until about, I don't know the exact, but up until about 9 months old, that's when they begin to realize that they're separate from their mom, and that's why they start to cry. They have that anxiety, separation anxiety, and they realize that they could lose her. And to the child, they are their mom. They haven't completely separated and understand that they're a separate being. And then as they get a little bit older, like 18 months, they realize, oh, I'm separate. I have my own voice. And that's when they start saying no. And we see that as defiance. We've been told, oh, that's the sin nature rearing its ugly head. And we're going to talk about that in a minute too. But it's actually a healthy developmental stage where they're learning their independence and that they're a separate person. And that's the only way, the first way, that they learn how to express their individuality. So the last thing we want to do is to take away their no, because that is the most basic human boundary that there is. If you've ever read the book by Henry Cloud and John Townsend called Boundaries, they tell you don't want to take away your child's no, because that's why we have a whole, society of adults that don't know how to say no. And we just, someone asks us to do something, and it's like, oh, we feel like it's wrong to say no. A lot of people do. I don't know, I've never had that problem, but but a lot of adults do. And it's because they were subconsciously trained when they were little that saying no to somebody is kind of a bad thing. So that's something we don't understand about them. So then we get to the age of 3 to 8, and the brain develops from the bottom up. And so, they're becoming more awake, more aware, and they come into theta brainwave states, which are very creative, but still highly suggestible, meaning you can tell them just about anything and they'll believe it. If you think about it, kids believe in Santa Claus, which is a completely ludicrous idea. Everything about Santa Claus doesn't make any sense. But why do they believe it? Because they'll believe anything at that age, right? So they're still highly suggestible. In other words, highly, naive. We call it naive. You can tell them anything, they'll believe it. And, if you tell a 4-year-old, if you swallow a watermelon seed, you might grow a watermelon in your belly. And if you say it with a straight face, they're going to look at you like, oh my goodness, did I swallow one? So it's not really good to tease kids that way and take advantage of their naivety, because it's kind of cruel in my book. But anyway, I've seen adults do that, and they think it's funny because they don't understand that the kid doesn't understand that it's just a joke. At this stage, from 3 to 8, they still can't make thought out decisions or understand abstract concepts. So you don't teach a first grader algebra. It's interesting to me that in the American education system that they're trying to bring higher level thinking skills down to the lower grades, thinking that it'll give kids a leg up. And it's so funny to me that educators don't understand brain development and understand how futile that is. They just don't have the ability to understand those things. They can't even tell fact from fiction until about age 8. And if you think about it, going back to the Santa Claus example, 8 years old is about the age, or 3rd grade, when kids start to figure out that Santa Claus is a myth. And it just fits right in with the brain development. They don't have the ability to reason things out. So they're very black and white, still need very concrete concepts. So when we talk to our kids and we're explaining to them why we need them to do this or why we got to do that, it's really just confusing to them. They need very clear-cut, straightforward directives that are black and white. Okay. And then it isn't until about age 13 where children can analyze data and reach conclusions. This is when they can actually compare choices and make thought out decisions. Now, none of this is like a light switch that goes from off to on. It's a progression. But so 13 is really about the age where they're held accountable. In fact, in the Hebrew culture, which is where the scriptures come from and come through to understand the culture, to understand a lot of what the scriptures are talking about. But in the Hebrew culture, I'm sure you've heard of a thing called a bar mitzvah, which is still practiced in the Jewish communities nowadays. And bar mitzvah is a rite of passage from childhood to adulthood. And that happens at age 13 for boys. And for girls, it's at age 13. It's called a bat mitzvah. And that coincides with brain development. Girls develop faster than boys. And so this is the age of reason. And in the Hebrew culture, this is when a child was held accountable for his actions, not until age 13. In fact, the term bar mitzvah literally means son of the commandment. And so at that point, the father, during that ceremony, traditionally, the father would get on his knees, raise his hands to heaven and thank God that he was no longer responsible for his child's behavior, that now the child was responsible for his own behavior. But that wasn't until age 13. So we've been expecting a lot of our kids long before they even have the cognitive ability to be able to do the things we want them to do. For example, we expect 2-year-olds to remember something we tell them, to make a choice not to do it or to do it, and to follow through on that, and we punish them when they can't. That's a little way too much for a 2-year-old. They just can't do it. So, and then we punish them for not being able to. So we're really shooting ourselves in the foot by the way we've been parenting our kids. So here's a quote from Paul Hegstrom, who is a PhD in psychology. He's a Christian, and he wrote a book from his own experience. He had a difficult childhood. He was the son of a pastor, and he was abused several times as a child, repeatedly, and nobody knew about it. And it just, it just ruined him on the inside. And he had a terrible life after that until it was married, and then the marriage fell apart. And anyway, it was many, many years into his adulthood when he got healing from his trauma, and then he became a psychologist, and he wrote a book called Broken Children, Grown Up Pain. And it's a very good book. I highly recommend it. But this quote, he's addressing what I just talked about as far as age 13 being this age of reason and accountability. And he says in his book, and this is not his opinion, this is from the field of psychology and from all the studies of child development. He says a child under the age of puberty, so 12 or 13, lacks the chemicals in the brain to see the whole picture and make decisions. And so we've really been expecting way too much of our kids at an early age. So that's the first reason. That was a lot, but that's the first reason that why our children aren't minding, is because we're addressing them in a way that they can't compute, they can't process. And that's what I learned with my daughter when she was a little girl, was that I needed to talk to her in a way that she could process, instead of these, long drawn out emotional things that we say to our kids about what we want them to do. So the second reason that our kids don't do what we say is because we have misinterpreted their spiritual state. Here in the Western world, we've been taught largely in Christian circles that children are born sinful and that they operate out of a sin nature. If that's something you've ever heard in church, or it was alluded to, or sometimes pastors will say, "Oh, my son, this did something, and it's his sin nature," or whatever. But if you've ever had that teaching or heard that teaching from Christian circles, if you click your raise your hand button there, I don't know if I'm the only one, but I didn't get saved till I was 34. And I didn't grow up in traditional evangelical Christianity, Western Christianity. And so fortunately, I did not, I see some of you raising your hand on that. I did not have that wired into me. And it's really interesting because my own story, which I don't have time to share all of it tonight, but you'll hear bits and pieces, is really, I can see how God was setting me up for my calling, which is to mentor parents. And part of it was my own childhood and my own upbringing and my own spiritual background. Because I was 14 when I remember that I prayed to God and I said, "God, if you're real, I want to know it." Well, he did not answer me for 20 years. And I remember being kind of mad, like, "God, why did you wait 20 years to answer that prayer, after the fact?" And now I know that some of that was because of what I needed to experience for my calling, my training for my calling. And part of that was not being indoctrinated with traditional evangelical Christian view of raising children, which was a blessing to me. So anyway, but when you believe that your child is sinful, it's like, and he's operating out of a sin nature, it's like putting on glasses. Did you ever get the glasses that were red, and you look at the piece of paper and you can't see the red letters, right? I remember when I was a kid, and you get them in the Cracker Jacks box, and you put them on, look at the paper, and you can see the secret message, or you can't see it, and then you take them off and you can see it. Well, when we look through that lens of they're operating out of their sinful nature, then we're going to see the things they do as coming from their sinful nature. And most of what we call sin in our children is actually just childish behavior. They don't know what socially acceptable behavior is. They're not out there doing immoral things. They're just doing things that we don't want them to do, things that irritate us. Hi, Diana, welcome. And things we've told them not to do for our own convenience and for the sake of, just the household running the way we need it to run. So, but because we've been told it's sin, we see it as that. And that's actually a Calvinistic mindset. And it was brought to America by the early settlers, the Puritans and Pilgrims, who were heavily influenced by John Calvin. And he just believed that human beings were completely separated from God when they were born. And nothing could be further from the truth, especially when it comes to children. In fact, I like to look at what Jesus said, because he said some pretty profound things about little children. Not a lot, but we just kind of glaze over it. But as the Lord led me to study the scriptures and see what he says about kids and raising them, I found a lot of cool things. And one of them is Matthew 18:3, where Jesus said, "Assuredly, I say to you, unless you are converted and become as a little child, you will by no means enter the kingdom of heaven." Like, what? What did he just say? He said we needed to be converted and become like a little child. Okay. And then he said, there's no other way, by no other means will you enter the kingdom of heaven. So what is it about little kids that makes them qualified for heaven? Well, we know what qualifies us for heaven. We have to be sin-free. We have to be innocent. We have no guilt, right? Well, that's the way kids are. They don't know the difference between right and wrong. Just everything just is. So they don't judge and they don't decide. And they're not, like we talked about, they're not making decisions to do good or bad, which is a good thing. They just believe. And actually, that's what's required to be saved. You just believe. That's the work of God. We just believe on the Lord and we're saved. So that they're there. And, we think that, like I said, the things that they do is driven by their sin nature. Well, are kids born with a sin nature? Well, they're born with an Adamic nature, their human nature, and they're born with a spiritual nature as well. It's whichever one we feed is going to grow. And so that we're going to look at in just a minute how we're actually feeding the sin nature. Another point I want to make is the flesh and the sin nature are not the same thing, because the flesh is just our humanness. There's actually two words in the scripture for that. Carnal is what happened in the fall, what was awakened in the fall. And the carnal nature is wanting to do things separate from God, apart from God, thinking that you know better than God. If you look back when Adam and Eve fell, that's what happened, is they decided that to listen to another voice instead of God. They listened to Satan. And like, yeah, I think we're going to eat this anyway, even though God said, if you do, it's going to bring death. So that's the carnal. Since a child can't decide, he can't operate out of a carnal nature. It isn't awakened yet, because he doesn't have the ability to decide whether he's going to follow God or another voice, if that makes sense. Sorry, I'm not sure. That didn't sound very clear to me. But the example is like a baby cries because he's hungry. That's his flesh. He has a need, a physical need. You go to sleep because you're tired. That's flesh. That's not carnal. You eat because you're hungry. That's flesh. That's not carnal. The carnal nature is a mindset that is set against God. In fact, Romans says that the carnal mind is at enmity with God. That doesn't mean our natural ability to think and choose. It just means that desire to do things our own way apart from God. So I hope that makes a little more clear. So Jesus said that yet little children, they're fit for heaven. All right. So then in the Old Testament, God the Father in Deuteronomy 139 says that he's talking to the Israelites, and when they refused to enter the promised land out of unbelief. So they didn't believe what God said. And he says to them, you won't enter because of your unbelief. but your children, the ones who have no knowledge of good and evil, in other words, they don't know the difference between right and wrong, they're just innocent, um, they will inherit it. To them I will give it. So he says right there that little children, they don't have the knowledge of good and evil. We think that's a good thing to teach them, and that's the way we've approached parenting, which leads me right into the next reason why our approach to parenting doesn't work, or why our kids don't mind. And that is the knowledge of good and evil. So this is the discovery that rocked my world. When I went to the scriptures to learn what the Bible really said about raising children, the Lord led me back to the Garden of Eden. And just to kind of back up and fill in, so when I got saved at 34, I already had 5 children, and I learned to engage them peacefully from the world. I took a class at the YMCA, and I learned how to speak my daughter's language. And then I began reading other books and things and learning. It's just basic, child psychology. It's not difficult. And so when I came into the church, I was a little bit taken aback, to put it mildly, to see how Christians interacted with their kids in this very authoritarian, oppressive, controlling approach. And I thought to myself, do they know they're ruining their kids? And at the time, it was like, not my problem. I got enough on my plate, Well, then about 5 years ago, the Lord gave me this revelation and made it very clear that I needed to share this with the church because of the way we're raising our kids, and that it is actually bringing spiritual death. So let's look at this. So as I began studying the word, and I was like, Lord, you're going to have to show me, because, I heard all the scriptures that Christians would quote about, spare the rod and spoil the child, which actually isn't even in the scriptures. It's kind of a extrapolation. And that all these scriptures that, and they're mostly in Proverbs, about, that if you don't punish your kids, then you're not a good parent. And I've actually heard Christians say that. Oh, well, if you don't discipline, they call it discipline because that's a nicer word, but the word discipline actually means to teach or train. It doesn't have anything to do with punishment. Although that we've decided that punishing our kids is an effective way to teach and train them, but it actually isn't. It just creates resentment and anger and rebellion. So as I began studying to find out, okay, God, I don't see much in your word about parenting, and it seems like a pretty important topic. The Lord began to show me how much is actually there, and he took me all the way back to the Garden of Eden and the 2 trees in the middle of the garden. And I thought, okay, I've read about those 2 trees. There's not much there, but I'll go back and read it. So as I'm reading through Genesis, on Genesis 2, where it's talking about, just describing the garden and these 2 trees in the middle of the garden. I'm going to pull it up real quick here so I can read it for you. I come to Genesis 2:17, and where God says, but of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil you shall not eat, for in the day you eat of it, you will surely die. Now, I had read that many times, and I'd skimmed over the name of that tree because it didn't make a lot of sense to me. And I thought, why does it have this long, ridiculous name that doesn't make any sense? But in the context of parenting, with that on my mind, I'm reading this and it jumped out at me. I was like, the knowledge of good and evil? That's what brings death and caused the downfall of the entire human race. I thought, why are we teaching our kids right and wrong, which sounds like the same thing as the knowledge of good and evil, expecting it to bring life? And that was just like, it was like a bomb was dropped, because it just opened up my mind to see. And it was like the doorway to this whole new way of parenting that the Lord began teaching me about. And so, I was like, started delving into this a little deeper. And if you look at it, the one thing that stood out to me, it says, in the day you eat of it, you will die. So something died that day. God didn't use that phrase haphazardly or loosely. I mean, I feel like God's pretty specific about what he says. So what died? Well, we know the way that Adam and Eve saw everything instantly changed. And that's because prior to this knowledge being, ingested, they didn't know evil existed. They were innocent, much like our children are when they come into the world. They had no knowledge of good and evil. Everything just was. And there were actually no rules. God didn't tell them not to do this or not to do that. They were like kids. Every desire was fulfilled. The Garden of Eden means delight or pleasure fulfilled. And so if you look at it and kind of fast forward to John 3, where Jesus is talking to Nicodemus, and he says that you must be born again. It's like, wait a minute. Okay, something died that day in the garden, and Jesus came back to restore what was lost in the garden. So Jesus goes on to say, it's a spiritual rebirth. We know that, but we don't think about the fact that that's what died in the garden. So what happened was, before the fall, Adam and Eve were seeing through spiritual eyes, but then their spiritual eyes closed, because when you die, your eyes close, right? And then if you read on in Genesis 3, 4 through 7, we see then what happened. I can get over there real quick. When they ate the fruit, well, first of all, the serpent tells them, oh, you won't die. He says, God knows in the day you eat of it, your eyes will be opened and you will be like God, knowing good and evil. Well, that actually was kind of true. The first part, you will not die, wasn't true. I mean, I guess it could be true because physically they didn't die. Eventually, physically they died because death entered their spirits. But he said, your eyes will be open. You'll be like God, knowing good and evil. And so they ate the fruit. And then it says, then the eyes of both of them were opened. And so this explains why everything looked differently to them. For example, first of all, they looked at themselves and they said, we're naked, because their spiritual eyes closed and their natural understanding, knowing good and evil, was awakened. And they began seeing everything through their human understanding, with this belief that everything is either good or bad, right and wrong, which brings judgment. And the first thing they judged was themselves. And they judged themselves unworthy of God's presence, and they hid. So this knowledge of good and evil, knowing right and wrong, is not a good thing. It still brings spiritual death. So teaching our kids right and wrong isn't doing them any good. It's actually causing them to be separated from God, because anytime you operate through that behavior, being good or bad, you're going to fall short. Knowing good and evil, it causes you to judge yourself, because nobody can measure up that way. And if we're telling our children this is bad, this is bad behavior, then they start seeing themselves as like being accepted or good based on their behavior. Let me get back to my notes, because I don't want to miss anything. This is important. So when we teach our children right and wrong, we're expecting it to bring life, and it brings death. It still brings spiritual death. And that's why 2 out of 3 children raised in Christian homes walk away from the church as young adults, because we've been training them up in a behavior focused environment, and they believe that's the way God sees them, because children will relate to God the way they relate to their parents. So if you're relating to your children through behavior and you're focused on behavior, they're going to believe that's how God relates to them. And so we're actually training them in religion or works, because we're teaching them that they're accepted based on their behavior. And the sad thing is when they fight against it, because they're actually fighting for their freedom. We call it rebellion, and yet we're force feeding them this poison fruit of death, and then punishing them when they won't accept it. It's pretty sad, and it really, I don't know, it just really causes a lot of angst in me when I just think about it. The problem with teaching knowledge of good and evil brings spiritual death. It also activates that carnal mind. That's what awakened Adam and Eve's carnal nature. They did something separate from God, thinking that they knew better than God. So when we teach them right and wrong, we're actually feeding that carnal nature, that sin nature. We're awakening it rather than feeding their their spirit, and creating their spiritual identity and their spiritual connection with God. So the other thing about this behavior-focused right and wrong approach to raising our kids is that it's behavior-focused. And like I said, that creates that religious mindset, that works mindset. But God tells us he doesn't look at the outward appearance. He looks at our heart. We know that God judges us based on the state of our heart. It's with our heart we believe. And that's what God is looking for, a heart that just believes his word, that believes him. He is word. So 1 Samuel 16:7 is where it says, a man looks at the outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart. So the other flaw with this knowledge of good and evil approach or behavior focused teaching right and wrong is it doesn't address the heart, and it can't address the heart. So like I said, kids are then learn to relate to God through behavior, and that's a works mindset. So basically, when we teach our kids right and wrong, we're feeding them this deadly fruit that brings death. And when they're old enough to evaluate and reason, they're like, well, I know I don't measure up. I never measured up. My parents were always pointing out where I did wrong. I was always being disciplined, punished, etc. And it's creating this mindset of I'm not good enough. And so they're like, I'm not good enough for God. So they walk away because it's that feeling of failure and disappointment. Like, I've disappointed God. I'm not good enough. So they walk away. And that's a good thing, because the ones that stay, have a lot of those have bought into the idea that they can behave and be good enough for God. I'm not saying 100%. There are some kids, and a lot of kids that do know God for who he is, but the way we're parenting is not helping. This traditional way of parenting is not helping them know God for who he really is. So what our kids need from us, they don't need instruction in right and wrong behavior. What they need is programming and what God says about them. And so instead of this instruction, which goes from the outside in, we're trying to control their behavior from the outside in. We need to address their heart and create a spiritual identity on the inside, because that's what we all live from. We all live from what we believe about ourselves, which is in our heart. And then their behavior becomes automatic. Because if you believe that you're good, that God loves you, that you're royalty, you're going to behave like that. So by creating that spiritual identity and just that, if you just took spiritual out of it, just a positive self image, feeling like that they're good enough, that they can do great things, that they were made for greatness, that they're world changing. Just creating a positive self image is what it's going to do. Is if your child sees himself as royalty, he's going to behave like that, and he won't do things or allow things to be done to him that are not congruent with the way he sees himself. So you're actually sin proofing him, to put it for lack of a better term. In other words, I'm not going to go and into promiscuity or drugs or gangs or things like that if I believe that I'm, that's like down here. It's like, you don't have to teach your kids what to do and not to do. If you teach them who they are and what their value and worth is, they'll automatically protect that, because something that you value and you see has worth, you protect it. You don't sell it cheap. You won't give it away. And so I saw that with my own kids. Even though I didn't get saved till I was 34, and I didn't know all this stuff when my kids were coming up, one thing I did understand was that they needed to have a positive self-image, and I was able to instill that in them for the most part. And so I didn't worry about them going off and doing all these things like drugs and stuff. I believed that they were valuable, and so they believed they were valuable. So we have to learn to look at our kids now through a different lens and to see the value and worth, because they have equal value and worth in God's eyes as anyone. And yet Jesus even said probably that they're at a better place than we are, because he said that we had to become like them. So we need to learn from them, not the other way around. Because if you think about it, a child comes into the world, he's an untainted soul. He hasn't been polluted by all the, garbage of the world and all the thoughts of the enemy and all those kind of things. They're innocent. We know they're innocent because we try to protect it, but yet we've been taught they're sinful. So it's like double-mindedness when we look at our kids. So just to kind of summarize, the reason our kids don't mind is that we've been giving them instruction and behavior instead of programming their identity and teaching them who God says they are. And then they'll live automatically from that. Also, we've been expecting them to operate at a level of cognitive ability that they just don't have, expecting, young children to make decisions and choices and remember what's expected, and to, operate at a level of adult thinking that they don't have. And we've also been treating them, like I said, as if they're full of darkness when Jesus said they're fit for heaven. And we've been feeding them this poison fruit of the tree of death and expecting it to bring life. We've just been trained that, oh, if we just do it long enough, it'll work, or hard enough. And yet the reality is that God has made it so easy to program our children for success. And when I say success, I don't mean worldly success. I mean success in every manner of life, personally, spiritually, relationally, professionally, in every way. He's made it so easy, and yet we've made it difficult because we're actually going at it from the wrong angle. Instead of from feeding our children life, we're feeding them death. So what our job is as parents is to create a spiritual identity. We form our children, we create them physically, and then we get so focused on that we forget that we have to co-create with God their spiritual identity. It's already been determined by God, but it's us. We're the voice of God in their life. It's up to parents to create that in their child, to teach him who he is in God's eyes, and then he'll be that. It's so easy. And then also to nurture that spiritual connection they have with God. So if you've ever done any kind of like meditation or anything like that, we're trying to get into that brain state where we can hear from God. We quiet our minds, and children are already there, because we talked about how when they're born, they're in that dreamlike state. And then as they gradually awaken, it's many, many years. So they actually are in a state where they can easily connect with the spirit realm. And I believe that little children do have a unique connection with God. And I've seen it in some of my own grandchildren, that if you talk to them about spiritual things, they understand what you're talking about. You can see it in the way even an infant responds. So what we've been doing is actually the opposite of what we need to be doing. And it all goes back to this teaching our children right and wrong and expecting that to bring life. So there's Marilyn. She just, we lost you for a minute. So what I was saying was that we need to create, what we need to be doing is creating our children's spiritual identity, teaching them who God says they already are, and then they'll live from that. We also need to nurture their spiritual connection with God, because as we said earlier, their brain state is actually in a meditative state for many, many years before they actually become fully conscious. And so they can easily, and I believe they do, connect with the spirit realm, and they know things in the spirit realm, but we're not nurturing that. And so they lose it. And when we teach them the knowledge of good and evil, it closes that connection, that spiritual connection, that natural spiritual connection they have with God. So that is why we have been failing to engage our children's cooperation, and why they don't listen to us. And so this begs the question then, well, then how do we raise our children without teaching them right and wrong? And how can we actually program them for obedience in anything we want them to do? So the way God has designed them, it's actually very easy for us to literally program them for a lifetime of success. If you remember, I said earlier, in the 0 to 3 years, they're completely receptive and their entire worldview is created. So as parents, we need to learn how to create that worldview in the way that God has designed it to be. And for each individual child, but also, in a general sense, that we're all loved by God, that we're all accepted, that we're all forgiven, that we're all unique, that we all have a purpose, that, but then there's individual things that, our children are put here, and individual parts of their identity that we need to help them discover. So basically that's what I have tonight. And then I just really want to introduce the concept of why our traditional approach to parenting is failing, and then offer you an opportunity to learn how you can turn this around and learn how to parent the way God designed. And so if that's something that you are interested in doing, I offer a 3-day workshop. I'm going to start one tomorrow and run through Wednesday. And it's just 1 hour each day. And really what I teach in this 3-day, it's called Programming Your Child for Success. It's a lot. It's really 3 workshops in one, and I could expand each topic into 3 days in and of itself, but I try to get the things you need in one place so that you can get started on this journey. And then in this community that I'm building, you'll have more opportunities to learn and grow as I build more workshops in there. And also you can connect with other parents there. So we're all on this journey together. And I'm trying to establish a community of support where we can turn this ship around. So anyway, if that's something that you're interested in, there's going to be a link in the group. And you can, or I can put the link, let's see if I can put it in the chat. Can you just unmute? I mean, is this something that either of y'all that are on here interested in doing this week? Because I'm thinking I may postpone it. You would be interested, Marilyn? There are more people that were interested in this. Some are going to watch the replay. So I may postpone the workshop till next week just to see if we can get more people on it instead of just doing it for one person.
Right.
Diana, I know that did you go through the last Programming Your Child for Success? It's a lot of the stuff you've already heard, but I don't think you were on it. But yeah. So I think I'm going to be out of town later in this week. So I may just wait and do it. I don't know. I may just do it this week, and then I can record it, and then I can just upload the class to the group, and they can watch it on their own time. We could do it that way. But normally I charge $47 for the 3 days. But I don't ever want someone not to be able to attend if they don't have $47. I honestly, what I share is life-changing. And I was going to share some testimonials just from previous workshops, parents that I've taught these concepts to. It's changed their families overnight. It's just incredible to me. And the reality is when you pick up the right key, it doesn't take a long time to open that door. You just need the right key. And so what I found is when we pick up the right tool, just with my daughter after my first parenting class, as soon as I used the right tool, I got the results I wanted. It didn't take years. It didn't take striving and struggle. It was like so much freedom. And so the testimonials that I've gotten from parents who have previously been through any of my workshops, I've done several package things in different ways, but this one, Programming Your Child for Success, is a fairly new one. I've taught once before, but just some of the testimonials I've gotten are this one mom. She said, "What Amy does is like nothing I've ever seen before. I had breakthrough with my children and saw a difference right away after only one call." She didn't even go through a workshop. She was at a crisis when I met this woman. I got on a 1-hour phone call with her, and I just fire hosed her with all, to give her that understanding of what was wrong. And then I gave her a couple tools. And she even says that after one call and just a few tools that she gave me to utilize with my children, I saw a difference right away. Her program is very unique and teaches us parents what the Bible truly says about parenting. I would recommend her program to any parent who's struggling in any way with their children. And then this woman said, "Amy is an instrument of God. She has the experience and understanding to show us how to parent with the heart of God the way He intended." If you didn't know, I have 8 children that range in age from 43 to 19. And my youngest son has special needs. So it's like I have this eternal, not toddler. He's cognitively probably 5 or 6. So I get to practice all the time. But here's a testimonial from a grandmother who said, "I wish I could have had this kind of coaching and mentoring when my kids were young that I'm pouring into my grandkids." And this was from a pastor. He said, "I've been trying to change we've been trying to change our 3-year-old's behavior for 2 years with no success. One tip from Amy and it changed immediately. That was a fun one. This is amazing teaching. Listen to this woman of God. She knows her stuff. And it's like, it's just stuff God showed me. It's not anything I, dreamed up. This woman said, thank you so much. So simple, yet so profound. And that's the thing. It is so simple. We've made it so hard. But anyway, I mean, the testimonials go on and on. Oh, this one was nice. It was from a single mom. She said, I feel this renewed sense of hope. I've been having a hard time being a single mom with 3 kiddos, and I just can't help but flow tears of joy because I know things are going to change. And, that was funny because she wrote that after just hearing this introduction. No, she could see how she had been approaching it. No wonder it's not been working. And so she just had this sense that I'm going to learn now some things. And she did. She went through the workshop, and it helped her a lot. But yeah, I think we should go ahead and do it tomorrow because I was planning to do that. And every time I put things off, it doesn't go well. So I think we'll go ahead and do it tomorrow. What I'm going to do is, if you want to sign up, see, let me go to the chat. And since there's only 2 of you on here, it wouldn't be hard for me to send it to you individually. I think I had the link to sign up already.
Hi, Marilyn. Where are you at?
In Missouri.
Oh, okay.
How about you?
I'm in Texas. I'm in not too far from Amy, but
okay.
I say not too far, but it's far because we can't do, so many things.
It's about an hour. It's close to an hour from my house to yours. Yeah. We both live in the Dallas area. I've known Diana for many years, but the Lord reconnected us through this parenting. Diana was the catalyst that got me to do my first workshop last December. So anyway, it's been fun.
I'm so excited. I mean, every time, Amy, that even how I talk to my kids, I'm always thinking about where I'm feeding, right? But sometimes it's hard because I'm battling myself. I just, it was one of your last things. And it just really, I think I share that with you a little bit because I know God loves me. I know I'm saved. I know, there's a lot of things I know, but I still struggle because of everything that I was raised with, no one, all these things that we're not told. So now I'm taking what was programmed in me,
right,
and fighting to get away from that programming and just realign myself with what God says. And I know what God says, and then even when I talk to my kids in Maryland right now, I have 7 grandkids, 3 adult kids, 1 17 and a 13-year-old. My oldest is 34. So now, even with my youngest, I mean, there's moments I have it's just, wow, I would even pray over him in his sleep. And because I figure when they're sleeping, they have the delta waves. And there's a lot of, but it's that consistency too, where that's part of my struggle is the consistency. But I'm hitting a roadblock with him, and I have to step back and okay, what words do I use? How do I do this so that he knows that no matter what, I love him? But gosh, sometimes I just want to give my kid a beat down.
Did we ever have a one-on-one call? I'll send you a link we can schedule a one-on-one call because you're supposed to get that with that one workshop you went through. And not many people scheduled it. So I'm sure you did. And we can talk about that. Yeah, we can talk about it. But yeah, that's the thing. It's very difficult to reprogram yourself. We all know that. Marilyn's older. We know it's so difficult, but it's so easy to program little kids. And and then Diana, you have teenagers, and it's like, oh, I wish I would have known this. Yeah, yes. I didn't know all this stuff when my kids were little either. Some of it I accidentally got right, but
I'm sorry, Amy. What I was going to say, a lot of it's not looking at my kids now, especially the 17 and the 13-year-old, and looking back at those first 3 years. What was it like for them? You
Mm,
know, and
yeah.
one, it was just really good. The whole dynamic of the family was good and everything. And then the youngest one, we were going through divorce. There was a whole lot of other stuff that, you don't realize that
Right.
they pick up in the spirit that's happening. And so a lot of things I just kind of
Right.
like, okay, you know what I'm
Right.
saying, right? Just looking back
Yeah.
at why I'm seeing what I'm seeing and what was poured in during that time.
Yeah. Well, and it's never too late. And I'll do a workshop for older adult children because I've seen changes in my adult children, and I can share some powerful. You may have heard me share that before, Diana, but how to actually change their spiritual identity without them, even if they live in a different household. You
That would
don't
be
even have to.
awesome.
Yeah. I don't know if you've been through that, but that's part of the workshop. There's a day. Let me tell you what's in the workshop. I forgot to go over that. So what we talk about in the workshop is creating spiritual identity. And you can do that in adult children because there's no time and space in the spirit, even if they're married and in another household. I did that with one of my daughters. Um, and where did it go? Where did I have that? Oh, here it is, right in front of me. So I'm going to teach you how to create instant and permanent obedience. I did that with my youngest son, who's now 19, and it's amazing. In one interaction, the Lord walked me through it. I had no idea what I was doing, what was going on, until I did it. And then I was like, and then of course, I had to reinforce it maybe for 2 weeks, and there was no punishment or rewards involved and no physical pain. It was simply by just the Lord showing me how to speak to him. And so you're going to learn that, and not just obedience. You can create any behavior or character trait in your child, or any belief about himself instantly and easily when they're little. Now, as they grow older, that window's kind of closing. It becomes more difficult, like Diana, you're saying with the teenagers. But if we can learn this and pass this on to the younger generation so that they can get off on the right foot, then we'll change the world. You're going to learn the one thing every child craves and needs to succeed in life. And that is something that I lived. The Lord taught me that through my own life. Because I grew up in a household that was very domineering, very controlling, very behavior focused, no positive, no affection. And I always, even though I was a high achiever, I felt like a failure. Literally. It wasn't just like a thought. Oh, I don't think. No, I literally believed that because that's what was programmed into me. And yet I had everything on the outside that looked like I should be successful. I had private school. I had my parents stayed married, very stable on the outside. Had all these music. I was academically and musically, I was very high achiever. And yet when I've been as an adult, I would say my life was a failure. Married and divorced 3 times, just no stability of any kind. But I look at my children who grew up with my very unstable adult life, and they're extremely stable. And I wonder, what do they know I don't know? I would watch as one by one, it seemed like they passed me up. And this was something that the Lord just intuitively gave me as a young parent that I was able to give my kids. Anyway, it is like in hindsight dissecting this and realizing what it was they got that I didn't get. So I'm going to teach you that the one thing that if you just do that one thing, you'll be so ahead of the game. And then we'll talk about the heart connection, because I don't know any parenting that talks about the heart, and that's where true influence happens. So I teach you very easily how to connect with your child's heart, how to honor his heart, and begin to connect there. And that's when you become his greatest confidant. He'll come to you because that's when he feels known and understood and heard. So those are kind of the 3 main topics that we do the 3 days. And it's powerful, very powerful. So I put the link in the chat to register. And once you register, then I will send you the link for the meetings, which we'll do in Zoom. And you'll be able to, we'll interact and ask questions and everything. And that's going to be 10 a.m. Central Time tomorrow, Tuesday, and Wednesday. Yeah. So that's all I got. Any comments or questions?
Can't wait to see you tomorrow.
Okay.
Okay, so you will send, okay, what do I do now?
If you want to sign up for the event that starts tomorrow, the workshop, I put a link in the chat Just
I
click
saw
on
that.
there. Okay, just click on that. And then once you pay for the workshop, then I will send you the link. That's all you need to do right now is just click on that. It'll ask for your, I will keep getting a notification on my phone. It'll ask, for your payment information. And then once I see that you've paid for the workshop, then I'll send you the links for the workshop. It'll just be the same link every day, but I'll send it out every day. And it's 10 a.m. Central Time, starts tomorrow morning.
Okay, and so will I be able to keep this information? Because I would like to share it with not only my daughter, who is the grandma of this house that I'm living in, and my granddaughter, I have two great grandsons.
Oh, wow.
And
Wow.
so we're a 4-generation home.
That's
And
awesome.
so and the grandsons are 2.5 and 1.5.
Oh my gosh, so perfect. So
Wow.
perfect. Yeah. Yes. So you will have access to the recordings. What I'll do is probably upload them into this community group, but it'll be in a private group. So only those that paid can access them. But yes, you will have access to them. Once you pay for it, you have it forever.
Okay.
Yay. I'm so
Okay.
excited. Yeah. I seem to get a lot of grandmothers, maybe because I'm a grandmother, that come through my workshops and are passing it down. So awesome. Awesome. Yay. I'm excited. It'll be
That's
fun.
great.
I'll see if I can round up a few more to join us tomorrow. But if not, I'll see both of you guys tomorrow, and I look forward to seeing you then. Anything else before we go?
Okay, I'm just making sure that I have a special needs granddaughter as well. I think you remember that. And so I'm on tap tomorrow. And so providing I have looked after her, I can be on
Okay.
at 10 o'clock because usually around 10:15 is snack time. And so I'm just thinking ahead of what my time would be.
Yeah. Yeah, no worries. I will make sure that you get the recording. If you sign up and you're not on live, I'll make sure you have the recording.
Okay.
Yeah. It's a new platform I'm working on, but I just work through each step as I go. It should be very easy. This platform is very easy. So
Okay.
anyway, but I appreciate it. Yeah. And
right.
were you able to get the link there, Marilyn, before I
I
close this
saw
out?
it in the chat. Yes.
Go ahead and click on it so it'll open up a new window for you, and that way you'll have it even though when I end the Zoom session.
Oh, wait.
Not doing anything.
It's not. Okay, I'll just text it to you. I have your number. I'll text it to you.
Okay.
Or would you prefer an email?
Either one.
Okay. I'll get that over to you after